Jenny, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing a tutorial with the new Anastasia Subculture palette. This palette had the most negative reviews I've seen in a palette in such a long time. So for me, I thought I'm just gonna go ahead and purchase this palette and see if I can make it work. The colors are pretty unique for a palette. You don't normally see this color selection or range in a palette. It's so different. There's lots of cools and warms together. You don't really see that. At first glance, I didn't think that I would want this palette. A lot of the colors here I would never wear, or I just never gravitate towards. Now I think that I will definitely be experimenting a little bit more, but I'm not a huge fan of green because since my eyes are green and green just don't really go together. A lot of like these purple tones, I just don't wear normally a lot of color. They're not like bright purples or bright colors. It's actually a very jewel tone kind of palette. So I was just not gonna get this palette at all. I thought like I'm gonna skip out on this. It's not that pretty, at least not to me. It wasn't at first glance, and with all the negative reviews it got, I thought like whatever, like it wasn't even that pretty anyways. I'm just gonna skip out on it, but I figured, you know, I'm just gonna challenge myself with all the negative reviews. I'm gonna see if I can sort of make this palette work. So I got the palette, and here is the tutorial with it. I did sort of practice a little bit. It wasn't like first impressions or anything. I really wanted to make this palette work, so I practiced a little bit what would be the best techniques to use with this palette. So hopefully you kind of pick up on some of these techniques. It was actually a very difficult palette to use. If palettes were like from beginner, intermediate to advanced, this palette is definitely in the advanced level. It is a pretty hard palette to use, to be honest. I was definitely struggling with it, but the more I use it, the more I'm more familiar, or I can kind of just like, I know what works and what doesn't work. So I'll kind of talk you guys through that as I do my mistakes. So I hope that you guys enjoyed this video, and if you guys have the Subculture palette and are ready to return it because it's not working for you, watch this video first. I hope that you guys learned something, and also I hope you guys like this makeup look. I tried to do something a little different, at least a little different for me, so I hope that you guys enjoy it, and let's get started on the tutorial. First thing I'm going to do is take a little bit of concealer. This is the Studio Finish concealer. I'm using a concealer, but you can use whatever you like as a base. When I'm using a concealer, I just like to make sure I don't over apply concealer. It has to just be a tiny bit of it. The next thing that I like to do is apply a light color all over my lid before I start to add my eyeshadows. In the Subculture palette, there's really no color that I can place on my entire lid because everything is a little bit too dark. So I'm going to go just into the Chocolate Bar palette and pick up this shade here, and then just pat that all over the lid. So now we can start to pick up some colors from the Subculture palette. The first color that I have here is color Dawn. So it's just kind of this light beigey, perfect transition color. So we're just going to use that as a transition. So when you are using this palette, you have to be very gentle with it. You've probably seen all these videos of people using it and hitting pan on the first use because they are so powdery, but I think it's more just because they are so pigmented. You just need a light little tap. Like all you need is just this tiny little tap. See, I'm gonna just tap my brush, but look how much product is already on there just with a little tap. I know it seems a little hard to believe because most palettes you kind of have to get in there and pick up the color, but here this is all you need. It's just a few taps and it's so pigmented. This of course is a light kind of skin tone color, so you're not gonna really see how pigmented it is until I get to the darker colors. The next shade I'm picking up is this one right here called Roxy. Again, just with the very, very, very tip of my brush. Just do a little patting motion, and look how much product is on there. That's all you're going to need to start off with. I'm sort of adding this in thin layers because you don't want to over apply the eyeshadow until you've kind of blended it out and it's like a perfect blend, and then you can go back in and deepen the color. That's sort of the best method with this type of palette, especially something so pigmented. Do it in very, very thin layers, and then once I don't have a lot of product left on my brush, then I can kind of start to push it around, blend it upwards, make sure it's like really, really seamless. Next color I'm picking up here is the color New Wave. I love this color. Again, just boop, edge. I'm not covering Roxy, I'm just going around it so it blends into New Wave. If that makes sense. I love the combination of for the next eyeshadow, I'm taking the color All Star and Roxy. I'm just going to be mixing those colors together to, of course, get right in between color. I'll eventually work my way over to just picking up All Star. I'm going to mix them together at first, and it's just like equal parts, so beep and beep. I'm going to start right at the outer corner. See how pigmented? It's already kind of building this super pretty like transition. Also, I'm using a very light pressure when it comes to blending this, because if you use too much pressure, you're kind of just dusting away the eyeshadow. You're not really working it into your skin. Sounds weird, but that's kind of what you're doing. Now I'm going to pick up a flat brush and just pick up All Star and start to pack this color onto the lid. I'm going to be taking a little bit of my concealer and I'm going to cut my crease with this, just about like the inner half of my crease. The next shadow I'm picking up is the color Adorn. This one here. This one, since it's more of like a metallic or shimmer, it's a little bit harder to pick up, so you do have to be a little bit more aggressive. Nothing compared to the matte eyeshadows. And then just start packing this eyeshadow onto your lid. Don't do a lot of rubbing because we're trying to prevent fallout, and as you can see, I barely have any fallout because I'm very light-handed with my brush, and I'm doing a lot of patting motions and very, very gentle blending motions. I'm picking up a little bit more of this color here, All Star. Kind of using that to soften Adore and All Star. Kind of using a little bit more on top of Adore to kind of bring them together a little bit and make it a little bit more like blended. My lower lash line, I'm going to start off with the color All Star. For the inner corner of my eye, I'm going to pick up this color here called Cube. So I start off by just applying it the way it is, dry, and then I'll go back in and wet my brush and reapply it just to kind of intensify it. With this outer edge of my lower lash line, I'm going to pick up a little bit of Rowdy and just stick to that outer corner. I finished my foundation, I've done my concealer, and I've also powdered. So now I'm just going to make sure that this is perfectly blended, and I'm just softening any edges where the concealer kind of made the eyeshadow look a little bit more blunt. I'm going to pick up a combination of Roxy and New Wave. I'm using this to kind of soften around the edges where I created sort of like a blunt edge because of my concealer. I normally like to do my concealer and my foundation before I do my lower lash line, but if I ever do my lower lash line first, then this is a way where I can kind of soften any blunt edges, is kind of just go back with that transition color. I'm taking the color Rowdy and kind of pressing that with my finger right onto that outer edge. The more blending I do, the more the color kind of sweeps away, so I like to reapply the color with my finger if I need to. So here I'm just reapplying Rowdy, and then I'll just take a little bit of All Star and kind of go around the edges again. Hi guys, so this is the finished result after I've of course applied some eyelashes and mascara. In the beginning it was a little bit harder for me to use. As I started to use it and get a little bit more comfortable with the formula, it became easier and easier, and with the techniques that I showed you today, hopefully you learned something new and you are not going to get rid of this palette if you do have it and love it. So hopefully you learned something new. If you did, give my video a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!